When you're faced with a massive, seemingly immovable professional or personal barrier, do you trust your gut or do you rely on hard data?
Oh, that is the million-dollar question,
Right.
right?
Because usually when we talk about high-stakes decision-making, there's this underlying assumption that our instincts are like a highly tuned GPS system.
Yeah, totally.
We assume that if we just kind of feel the room or read the vibe or just listen to that little voice in our head, we will naturally navigate through the storm.
And I mean, we are biologically hardwired to crave that kind of intuitive certainty. It feels safe, to believe that our innate instincts are these flawless warning systems.
Yeah, but the reality is quite different, isn't it?
Exactly. Relying on your gut in a complex, modern environment is often, well, it's like driving blindly into a hurricane simply because you feel like you know the way. The human gut instinct is famously and really demonstrably flawed when it comes to objective truth.
Which brings us to the focus of today's deep dive. We are looking at a really extensive, deeply analytical interview with Andrew Bustamante.
Right, the everyday spy founder.
Yes, exactly. He's a former covert CIA intelligence officer,
Yeah.
a U.S. Air Force combat veteran, and he runs Everyday Spy, which is this online platform dedicated to taking real-world espionage techniques and translating them into actionable skills for everyday life.
And we are really stripping away the Hollywood veneer of espionage here. I mean, no laser watches, no car chases.
I don't know, teenies.
Right, no martinis. Bustamante is someone who literally held the key to nuclear missiles. When you operate at a level where the consequences are that catastrophic, relying on a subjective gut feeling is a luxury you absolutely cannot afford.
It's a liability.
A massive liability. His entire philosophy is built around actively dismantling natural human psychology to find a systemic objective advantage.
And our mission for you, the listener, today is to explore that psychological profile of an intelligence agent. We want to learn how to extract those actual training methods for your own use.
Yes, we are going to move past the deeply ingrained myths of lie detection, for one.
We'll also break down the crucial biological difference between simple perception, like just perceiving things, and the active skill of being perceptive.
And finally, we'll look at how using structured intelligence frameworks, specifically the SAGE-RAC framework, can help you apply a ruthlessly objective perspective to overcome barriers in your own life and business.
Because the thread tying all of Bustamante's insights together is a rather uncomfortable truth, I think.
Oh, definitely uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's the idea that your natural instincts, the very cognitive shortcuts you rely on to keep you safe and informed, are often the exact mechanisms holding you back from evolving.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can start applying advanced intelligence techniques to, say, a tense board meeting or a complex personal relationship, we really have to unlearn decades of pop culture myths we've been fed about human behavior.
Bustamante specifically tackles the intersection of body language and lying, and he essentially takes a sledgehammer to the conventional wisdom of lying signs.
He really does. He dismantles the concept entirely. I mean, most of us operate under the assumption that deception has a physical manifestation.
Right, like we look for a twitch, a break in eye contact, a sudden shift in posture. It's like sitting at a high-stakes poker table and suddenly realizing that all the classic tells you were taught to look for, like a twitchy eye or a cough, are actually completely useless.
Completely useless.
But I have to push back on this a little bit, because how are we supposed to tell if someone is lying if the traditional body language signs are a myth? I mean, if someone is sweating profusely, suddenly stammering, and looking at the floor while they answer a simple question, my gut immediately flags them as deceptive.
Right, it feels obvious.
Exactly. Are we just supposed to completely ignore undeniable visual data like that?
What's fascinating here is the distinction between ignoring data and misinterpreting it. You are absolutely observing real, physical data. The flaw is in your diagnosis of it.
Okay, so I'm seeing the right things, but drawing the wrong conclusion.
Precisely. Spy training teaches operatives to separate biological stress from deception. The physical signs you're talking about, the sweating, fidgeting, vocal changes, those are the result of a sympathetic nervous system response.
The fight or flight response.
Exactly. They are indicators that a person's body is flooding with cortisol and adrenaline. That is a biological marker of stress, not a marker of a lie.
So, wait. A person could be telling me the absolute unvarnished truth, but if they are terrified of the consequences of me not believing them, they will physically look exactly like a liar.
Yes, but think about the physical reaction of being pulled over by a police officer. You know you weren't speeding, right?
Right.
You know your registration is current. But the moment those red and blue lights flash in your rearview mirror, your heart rate spikes, your palms start to sweat.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And when the officer asks for your license, you might even stutter. Your body is reacting to the intense stress of the power dynamic in the environment, regardless of your absolute innocence.
Wow. Okay, that fundamentally changes how you evaluate a conversation. Because if relying on those physical cues is just a recipe for false positives, how does a trained operative actually detect deception? If the visual dashboard is basically broken, what metrics are they using?
Well, instead of looking for microexpressions or sweaty palms, intelligence officers are trained to look for a person's core ideology, because people will almost always act in accordance with their core belief systems, their deeply held values, and their hidden motivations.
So it's about understanding the underlying essence of human manipulation rather than surface-level tics.
Exactly. When you rely on body language, you are essentially projecting your own subjective biases onto the target. You naturally assume, well, if I were lying, I would feel guilty and look away.
Right.
Therefore, because they are looking away, they must be lying.
You're just reading your own reflection in their behavior. That is wild.
It really is.
Yeah.
So, for you listening, by discarding those false assumptions about body language, you force yourself to listen to the architecture of their narrative. You stop looking at the sweat on their brow and you start analyzing the logical inconsistencies in their timeline.
You observe how their current actions align or misalign with what you know about their long-term motivations. But I imagine understanding someone else's internal stress response without projecting your own biases requires something much harder.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
have to control your own internal environment first. That requires a massive shift in how you process the world around you.
It requires moving from being a passive receiver of sensory inputs to an active, highly regulated observer.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Bustamante draws this sharp, very specific line between the concept of perception and the act of being perceptive. He emphasizes the absolute necessity of leaning into objective reality rather than relying on subjective feelings.
Right, the objective versus the subjective.
But let me challenge the mechanics of this. Human beings are naturally emotional creatures.
Hmm.
I mean, our memories, our decision-making processes, our very identities are entangled with our emotions. How does someone train themselves to just flip a switch to become a completely rational, objective observer without becoming a robot?
Well, the short answer is they don't turn it off. Attempting to suppress emotion entirely is biologically impossible. The brain just simply doesn't work that way.
Okay, so the CIA isn't full of emotionless robots.
No, not at all. The CIA doesn't train agents to not feel fear or anxiety or panic when a covert operation goes sideways. Instead, the training focuses on a very specific neurological mechanism. They teach agents to slow down your emotional brain.
Slow down your emotional brain. Okay, let's look at the actual mechanism there. What does that actually look like in practice?
So, when an unexpected crisis hits, say, a crucial client pulls out of a massive deal at the absolute last second, your amygdala fires immediately. That's the emotional primal center of your brain.
Right. It floods your system with an urgent command to fight, flee, or freeze.
Exactly. And that reaction is entirely subjective. It's based purely on survival instincts, not logic. Being perceptive, in the espionage sense, is the actively trained ability to insert a wedge of time between that initial emotional trigger and your outward behavioral response.
It's manufacturing a gap. Like you are creating a deliberate pause where logic can step in before the panic takes the wheel.
Yes, you feel the panic. You internally acknowledge the subjective feeling of terror, but you intentionally delay acting on it. Intelligence operatives use things like tactical breathing, cognitive reappraisal, and grounding techniques to force their prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, analytical part of the brain, to catch up.
You literally give your brain the necessary seconds to assess the objective reality of the situation, rather than just reacting to the noise of the alarm bell.
Precisely.
That makes the distinction between perception and being perceptive incredibly clear. I mean, perception is just the passive biological event. It is how the world happens to look to you through the distortion of your emotional lens in any given moment.
Yeah, it just happens to you.
Right. But being perceptive is an active, deliberate skill. It is the act of recognizing your emotional lens and actively looking past it to see what is actually happening.
This raises an important question, though, and it's one you listening should really think about. How often do your own subjective feelings and even your rigid sense of identity act as the very barriers stopping you from evolving and adapting to a situation?
Identity as a blind spot. That is such a profound concept.
Yeah.
Because if my identity is wrapped up in, say, being the smartest person in the room, The moment someone presents data that contradicts me, my emotional brain perceives it as a threat rather than just new information.
Exactly. Bustamante notes that our identity is often our most rigid construct. If you view yourself as someone who always trusts their gut, and your gut constantly misinterprets the biological stress of a negotiation for malicious deception, your identity is literally preventing you from seeing the truth.
You just remain trapped in your own subjective reactive reality.
Yeah, you become your own worst enemy in that room.
So adopting this rational, objective perspective is a highly trained skill. It's not an innate talent you're just born with. For anyone listening, mastering this wedge between stimulus and response means the difference between reacting emotionally to a crisis, like a massive drop in quarterly earnings, and calmly analyzing it.
It is the ultimate systemic advantage, because when the environment becomes chaotic, the vast majority of people will succumb to their amygdala. They'll panic, they will project their biases, and they'll make decisions based on subjective fear.
But the person who has trained themselves to slow down their emotional brain.
They're the only one capable of objective analysis. By default, they end up controlling the room.
Wow. If you can master that internal pause, you unlock the ability to act purely on the objective data you are gathering. And I think that is where the strategic application really comes into play. We've established the baseline, right? We are discarding the visual myths of body language, and we are doing the hard work of slowing down the emotional brain to become truly perceptive. But how do we weaponize that clarity? Bustamante translates these high-stakes espionage tactics directly into everyday business and personal success.
He does, because at its core, espionage is simply the raw business of human interaction operating under extreme pressure.
He brings up this intriguing concept of entering someone's secret life to understand their true ideology, which then allows you to influence or manipulate them. So what does this all mean? When we start using words like manipulation and infiltrating secret lives, it sounds inherently manipulative in a negative way.
It sounds super villainous.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So how does a professional practically and ethically apply this concept when they're simply trying to, say, close a B2B software sale or negotiate a better salary?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to entirely reframe the word manipulation. In intelligence operations and honestly in elite-level business strategy, manipulation is not about malicious deceit or trickery.
Okay, so what is it then?
It's about understanding your counterpart, your client, or your competitor so profoundly that you can anticipate their needs, align with their true motivations, and outmaneuver the obstacles in the way.
So it's more about radical alignment. You aren't tricking them into doing something they hate. You are finding where your objective perfectly aligns with what they secretly desire, but maybe won't publicly ask for.
Exactly. Bustamante explains that human beings segment their existence into three distinct spheres. There's a public life, a private life, and a secret life.
Okay, break those down for us.
So the public life is the curated persona. It's what they post on their corporate LinkedIn profile. It's the official company mission statement.
Right, the highlight reel.
Yeah. Then the private life is more guarded. It's what they complain about to their spouse or their closest confidants over a beer. But the secret life, that is the vault.
The vault?
Yes. It contains their deepest, often unspoken fears, their unvarnished desires, and their core ideologies.
It is basically the structural load-bearing wall of their psychology. And everyone else in a negotiation is distracted by the fresh coat of paint, which is the public life. They're arguing over features and price points. But the person who finds the hidden studs, the secret life, holds the actual structural integrity of the deal.
That's a great way to look at it.
But how do you actually find that load-bearing wall without asking them outright? Because obviously they're not just going to tell you their deepest fear.
No, they won't. You find it by being actively perceptive, like we talked about. You observe the discrepancies between their public statements and their actual resource allocation. You look for patterns in what makes them defensive.
Oh, I see.
For example, if a CEO's public life revolves around, disruptive innovation,
Yeah.
but you observe that their budget entirely protects legacy systems and they physically tense up when discussing market volatility.
Then their secret life is likely driven by a profound fear of obsolescence and a desperate need for stability.
Exactly. So if you are a competitor pitching a product to their public life, selling them more disruption, you're going to hit a brick wall.
Because you're pitching to the paint, not the studs.
Right. But if you've done the objective intelligence gathering, you pivot. You don't sell them software, you sell them an anchor. You sell them the stability and relevance they are secretly desperate for.
This is where Bustamante's framework comes in, right? To change the game when selling products.
Yes, to execute this methodically, he introduces the Sage Rat framework. This is a proprietary structure used by everyday spy to translate complex intelligence gathering cycles into actionable business and sales strategies.
Introducing a framework is great, but let's break down the mechanics of it. What are the actual steps a listener takes when applying a structure like this to adapt faster than their competition?
The power of a framework like SageRat lies in its systematic approach to human intelligence. It is a cycle. First, you must explicitly spot the right individual or opportunity, looking past the noise of the market.
Spot. Got it.
Then, you deeply assess their environment and behaviors to uncover that secret life and core ideology we just discussed.
Right. Finding the vault.
Exactly. Once you understand their true motivations, you develop a relationship or strategy that perfectly aligns with those hidden needs.
Spot, assess, develop, and the final step.
Only then do you attempt to recruit them to your objective. Whether that means closing a sale, securing a promotion, or forming a partnership, it moves you away from guessing and into a structured cycle of observation and aligned action.
It completely removes the reliance on the gut feeling. Instead of walking into a critical negotiation and attempting to just wing it based on the vibe of the room, you are running a diagnostic process. It forces you to mentally separate what you actually objectively know from what you are merely assuming.
And in any competitive environment, the landscape is violently dynamic. Market conditions change, new competitors emerge, client priorities shift literally overnight. Bustamante's core thesis here is that the ultimate victor is rarely the most heavily funded or the loudest.
It's the one who adapts.
Yes, it is invariably the entity that can adapt to changing realities the fastest.
Speed of adaptation is the ultimate currency.
And cognitive adaptation is impossible if your processing power is bogged down by an unchecked emotional brain, or if you are completely blinded by your own subjective biases. Structured frameworks exist to bypass human error.
They give you a track to run on.
Exactly. They provide a rigid, logical track for your brain to run on when the external environment is chaotic. By methodically uncovering the secret life and utilizing an objective intelligence cycle, you entirely rewrite the rules of engagement.
You aren't just reacting to the latest market trend or the anger of a client. You are operating on a deeper psychological layer. You are utilizing a systemic, objective intelligence gathering process to outmaneuver competitors who are still, frankly, hopelessly relying on their flawed gut instincts.
And outdated myths about how humans actually behave.
Right. It's like you're effectively engineering serendipity. By deliberately maintaining a more accurate, objective grasp of reality than anyone else in the room, the lucky breaks just seem to naturally fall your way.
Because you saw them coming before anyone else even realized they were possible.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together for you, the listener. We started by tearing down the deeply held belief that our gut instincts and the classic body language tells are reliable indicators of truth.
We learned that to genuinely understand the people around us, we have to look past the biological symptoms of stress and dig into the architecture of their core ideology.
We also examined the rigorous internal discipline required to achieve that clarity. It's not enough to simply memorize behavioral facts. You have to do the hard psychological work. You have to actively train yourself to insert a wedge of time between your amygdala's panic response and your logical brain's assessment.
You have to choose moment by moment to be perceptive.
And finally, we explored how employing a structured intelligence cycle, like the SAGE-RAT framework, allows you to weaponize that objective mindset. It gives you the blueprint to systematically uncover the secret life of your targets, anticipate their underlying needs, and adapt to shifting environments faster than anyone else in the room.
It replaces the anxiety of guesswork with the calm of methodology.
Exactly. But as we close the file on this deep dive into the psychology of a covert operative, I know you have one final thread to pull.
I do. We've spent a lot of time analyzing how to read the hidden motivations of others. But building on Bustamante's profound assertion that our own identity is often our biggest obstacle, I want to leave you with this to turn over in your mind.
All right, lay it on us.
If a highly trained intelligence operative's absolute greatest weapon isn't a piece of technology, but simply an emotionally regulated, ruthlessly objective mind, what deeply held, subjective gut feeling about yourself are you blindly clinging to right now that is secretly holding you back from your own evolution?
Wow. That is a question that requires some serious space to answer. Next time you find yourself entirely convinced that your gut is pointing you in the right direction, you might want to pause, take a breath, and ask yourself what you're actually seeing. Until next time, keep digging.